Hey, we're going to be in town for this other thing. We're going to be at the Starbucks, that just happens to be right outside your base, if you want to come and chat for 30 minutes. We're not having classified conversations there, but what we're doing is we're getting them in person and we're showing them something, and we're using that to get little tidbits that we can then pull on.
Welcome to the Emergent Podcast, where we interview product and startup leaders from emerging technology companies about their work in the trenches to bring the hardest and most impactful technologies to life. Today's guest is Brett Granberg. Brett is the co-founder and CEO of Vannevar Labs, a defense technology company bridging Silicon Valley innovation and critical national security missions. A Stanford MBA graduate and a former In-Q-Tel investor, Brett brings a unique blend of intelligence community expertise gained during his tenure implementing AI solutions for U.S. agencies and private sector strategic insight from his time at McKinsey. Under his leadership, Vannevar has scaled its flagship product Decrypt to 65 plus DoD deployments, achieving profitability within 5 years, and he has secured $91 million in funding while advancing non-kinetic defense capabilities against global adversaries. His work has been recognized by the Defense Innovation Unit and U.S. military commands for enabling real-time multilingual intelligence analysis in high-stake environments. In this episode, we explore how Vannevar Labs is building next-generation collection technology to challenge the dominance of traditional defense primes. Brett explains the company's founding thesis that the U.S. government doesn't just have too much data, it often has the wrong kind of data for today's geopolitical threats. To solve this, Vannevar has invested in building its own sensing stack, deploying RF sensors on remote islands, building secure digital pipelines, and focusing on early, context-rich collection, especially focused on hard target environments like China and Russia. We examine the company's non-traditional approach to national defense, what Brett calls non-kinetic operations. These include perception shaping, cyber operations, and control over adversary information access. Strategies that are decisive in modern conflict but receive a fraction of the investment that munitions do. The lesson: shaping what an adversary knows and believes is just as strategic as shaping what they can physically do. Brett shares how his career from baby lotion pricing at McKinsey to In-Q-Tel to Stanford Business School prepared him to build a defense startup from scratch, using his time as school as protected time to experiment. One early failure, an Arabic OCR product that flopped, taught the team a vital lesson. When a product isn't landing, the issue isn't always a lack of features. It may be a mismatch between your solution and what customers truly need. We walk through Vannevar's ascent from a $15,000 pilot to over $80 million in revenue, fueled by a playbook of forward-deployed engineering, self-funded R&D, and iterative pilots that bypass traditional cost-plus procurement. Brett unpacks how they've navigated the classified-unclassified divide and how they've used unfunded requirements, needs the DoD hasn't officially budgeted for, as a wedge to get in the door. Finally, we discuss novel new product features such as LLM-powered agents that are redefining search and how Brett does multi-year planning to set the path to $1 billion in revenue. And now, a word from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Propel Auth. Startups and corporate innovation teams routinely waste months building core user authentication and authorization flows into their products. Propel Auth has automated all the most important pieces of the user management lifecycle. Instantly set up wait lists, magic links, social login, user impersonation, user management, role-based access control, SAML integrations for enterprise, team management, and much more. With Propel Auth, each of these challenges takes just a few lines of code instead of months of development and integration time. And with thoughtful control over design and skinning, it's easy to keep your product fully on brand. Get a generous free starter pack that scales through 1,000 monthly active users, or mention Emergent25 to receive 25% off for the first 6 months for more mature products. Get back to building your actual product and let Propel Auth handle your user management needs. Visit Propel Auth, that's PROPELAUTH.com to learn more. Brett, pumped to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, let's get started. A lot of people have heard of Vannevar, but very few people know what you guys actually do. Can you give us a little bit of background on the company's mission and its products?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so Vannevar, the mission for us was to kill the defense primes. For me, it was specifically Raytheon, the experience I had at In-Q-Tel actually. it was very motivating for me. I think we build both hardware and software products, and the way that we build things generally falls into three categories right now. So we think about it as sense. And so some of our products are just going out and collecting hard to access data. This could be both on the hardware and the software side. This side, which is more about once you have all this heterogeneous data, how do you process it in a smart way to make it actually useful? And then act, how do you enable somebody to actually do something off of that data from an operations standpoint? We work on missions that span intelligence, economic warfare, cyber, maritime sensing, primarily focused on competition with China. I think when people kind of that are familiar with the defense space, kind of when they start talking about understanding what we do, like kind of what people usually key on that's different for us is collection. And so we had this fundamental thesis that actually the government doesn't have access to the right data to deal with some of the new mission requirements. And so that's caused us to actually go out and figure out how to collect this data. So for example, if it's like a maritime sensing problem, we build our own RF sensors and we deploy them, overseas on an island to get access to what we need to get access to. If it's, something that involves like secure digital collection on some sort of hard data set, we'll go out and do that too. And that collection piece allows us to get really good data, and then that allows us to kind of have the domain knowledge to build, good software on that data and all that kind of stuff. But like from a macro standpoint, we are technology agnostic. We think about product development very much as like find hard mission problems and then work backwards in terms of what to build. And that's why for me, it's like, we build some hardware stuff, we build some software stuff. We'll probably keep doing that.
A lot of our listeners do have a defense background, but for some of them, the term collection is a little new. I know there's only so much that can be said about collection, but can you describe in broad terms what that even means in this community?
Yeah, so it is making sure that you have access to the right data in order to answer whatever question that you have or plan whatever operation you need to plan. An example, this might be, so for maritime sensing, making sure that you have the ability to detect a specific kind of ship and a specific location at a specific time. There are a lot of different ways that you could approach that problem. Maybe there's like an operational security way where you're going out and looking for, people that are like publicly reporting on that ship's activities. Or maybe you need to like physically place a sensor in a specific location to pick up a specific signal to say whether or not that ship is there. That our thesis is like, you should, there are gaps in collection and how the government, especially for some of the new problems that exist. And we build stuff to kind of try to address those gaps.
Yeah, I think it's a really important one because a lot of people, of course, make some comparisons between Palantir and Vannevar. And I think this is one of the key distinguishing factors is that Palantir, at least during the time that I was there, was never a company that was going out into the universe and trying to get information to bring into the intelligence apparatus or into a corporate apparatus. But you guys actually are doing some of that sense making.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it makes sense. Palantir kind of grew up in the counterterrorism domain, and the problem that the government had in that time frame was we have so much collection. How do we like process it in a super effective and efficient way? I think for problems like the China problem set, that is not necessarily the problem. It's actually we don't have the right collection. Like part of the problem is we actually don't maybe have the right collection. We need to answer some of those problems. So you kind of need a slightly different approach for some of those missions.
Yeah, let's talk about that directly. Like, what are non-kinetic defense operations, and what is this warfare of the future that we're actually preparing for?
Yeah. So when you think about non-kinetic, I think about it as I want to control a few things. Like I want to control what you think I'm doing or what I'm capable of doing. I want to control what other people think about you. I want to control what physical access you have to say like basing, like air basing or, ports or these sorts of things overseas. And maybe I want to be able to impact some of the key infrastructure that I think you might use remotely, where I don't have to take like a physical action to touch it. All of those actions are non-kinetic, and all of those actions, I think, fundamentally are going to determine is a war with China. They're parts of the puzzle for determining if a war with China is going to happen because they impact both their decision-making calculus and ours. And so you can think about like the fundamental technology that you need underlying those things, like fits into like cyber. Maybe there's sort of like digital information, things you can do there. but regardless, like those missions are really important and they're like extremely underinvested. I think like when you look at, I mean, not I think, I know they're extremely underinvested in from a DoD budgeting standpoint. Most of the money goes towards munitions. And so for us, I think it's a little bit of we're like a little bit non-consensus in that we think that's going to change. We are seeing that change. We're seeing more money go into some of these non-kinetic mission sets that are important for China specifically because they're so determinant of like what the outcome is going to be that DoD is realizing it needs to invest more in them. So that's a little bit how I think about it. You need to do both. Like, to be clear, we're not like Anduril needs to exist. You need to build munitions. You need to build like platforms that, you know, are more capable than China, because that impacts their calculus. But what also impacts their calculus is like, what do they think? What do people think about them? What access to basing they have, and like how able are you to impact you know, their infrastructure without using a kinetic asset?
Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me, this is not a perfect example, so feel free to riff on it. But, you know, I always joke with people, they're like, what does counterbalancing China actually mean? And if you're a defense person or a national security person, you know that on some days it might be something really simplistic, like we're paving a new road in a rural town in a sub-Saharan African country, and we're paving it near a road that the Chinese paved. And now we're doing it to curry favor with the local government, but we're not actually bombing anybody. We're not patrolling. We're not detaining anybody. We're not taking those sort of kinetic actions. Now, you guys are a little bit more on the information side of it, though, right? Like maybe trying to change the hearts and minds in a situation like that. Is that example even useful for you?
I think it's staging hearts and minds is not useful unless it's extremely tactical. Like, you're trying to change specific people's thinking, not just like in general, do people view, you know, America in a positive light? And so I think that's where um uh having like sitting with the specific DoD groups that have these missions and understanding really what are they trying to get at and building products side by side that help them get at specific effects is really important, versus trying to jam like some, you know, what we think might be a good idea, or, you know, or what, I don't know, just like some predetermined tech thing into their spaces. Because these missions are new, actually what we found is like deploying something with folks and then iterating really quickly, like actually can fundamentally change how they think about their jobs and their like the outcomes they're trying to get. Because once they realize they have new levers to achieve some of the things that they want to do, they can think about the mission in a new way. And so I think for some of these emerging mission sets, they're underinvested in because nobody historically has cared about them. It's sort of like a counter whatever bet, but they're also new in that there's like a lot of room to shape them, like when you're working with the government. And so it's kind of that those are some of the dynamics when working on these problems.
And why does the national security community need vendors to collect this information? Why aren't they just collecting it themselves?
That's a great question. I don't know. That's this is like the age-old question of like, why do, like, it's kind of like why aren't the defense primes like building things that make sense? You know, it's kind of like one of those questions, or like, you know, in 20 years, like eventually, yes, like the government and the defense primes might get to like, you know, roughly like the right answer themselves, but that's 20 years. It's like far too long of a time horizon. So yeah, I think when you have this dynamic of like, it's a new and emerging mission problem and there's like an engineering heavy component to it, you can only, like, as a country, we can only really get at the right answer if you have smart engineers iterating with people that deeply understand the mission on the government side. It's kind of like the government can't do it on its own because it doesn't have the engineering expertise. Tech companies can't do it on their own because they don't actually understand what the mission problem is. I know I'm like preaching to the choir probably on this podcast, but like it's that merging of things that actually makes the magic happen. And that merging of things, you know, it's the primes are not incentivized to do that because, you know, cost plus contracting and whatever, for like a million reasons. And the government doesn't necessarily have the engineering expertise to do it themselves. So I really think it's like, it's the magic. This is like the whole thing of like, it's the magic of like really, you know, private sector, good folks in the tech industry coming together on an important problem that ends up with like the most interesting results.
Yeah. And do you agree as well, though, that a piece of it is also around giving the government some arm's length distance from the actual work so that, when a particular thing is being looked at, you're not leaving a digital exhaust footprint of this particular government agency was looking for this particular type of information and then sort of telegraphing to our adversaries, hey, we were paying attention to that.
I think the biggest advantage in us building this stuff is speed. This is going to be true for like every like defense tech company though, but like the biggest advantage of doing like a defense technology company or a startup building anything on like a mission problem is purely speed and speed of iteration. I think that there are things that we do on the engineering side that the government could just replicate, but it would take them literally a decade to do something that it takes us 6 months to do. It might take them a full decade to do it. Because of just like their core function is not like building products. Their core function is like doing like what the government should do, like other important things. So I think that's the key. There's nothing I don't think there's anything like fundamentally about the problems that we're working on stopping the government from building stuff other than just iteration speed and like having the right expertise in house. I think that's true like largely for most of the defense tech.
I've seen the same thing at every defense technology company I've been at, including Palantir, where it's not that there aren't a couple of programs in the government working on these things. It's just that the pace is slow, the vision is slow. Occasionally you find an amazing engineer, but frequently it's not the best engineers working on those challenges. So it's just tough. So I get that. Let's talk about you for a second, though. Like one of the things that I think is really interesting is that you went from McKinsey to In-Q-Tel, which for folks who don't know is the CIA's investment arm that looks at interesting technologies that could be used for national security missions. That seems like a pretty non-linear career path. How did you make that particular transition?
So yeah, when I started at McKinsey I was a journalist, consultant, whatever. So you get put on all these like random projects. The first couple projects I put on, I realized very quickly that I did not want to do that job. I think like the first project was like paper check processing efficiency for some bank. Oof. And the second project was like baby lotion pricing for like companies in Brazil. And like I wanted to work 60 hours a week on neither of those projects. And so I was like very quickly, knew that's not what I wanted to do. So I knew I wanted to do national security stuff. And I heard that there was out of the DC office, McKinsey actually was doing some pretty interesting stuff with, like unnamed government agencies, and also doing some stuff with private sector defense companies. And so as soon as I humanly could, I transferred over to that office and I started working with some of the defense primes and also some folks on the government side. And that got me exposed to like the, national security, TSSCI, whatever world. And then there was one project that just like hooked me on it, like pretty strongly. And so when I was coming out of McKinsey, my main calculus was like, all right, how do I do more of this? And at the time, there were not a ton of options. Like Palantir was one option coming out of it was like Palantir or In-Q-Tel or like data miner, maybe if you like squint kind of hard. Like those were like in 2015, 2016, whatever, those were like the options that were possible, or go work for the government as like a GS-10. And then like in 15 years, maybe, if you might be in a position to have like a high impact. So that was this guy, Dan Guak, like pinged for whatever reason the McKinsey listserv in DC, and I saw his email, I saw the job description, and I was like, yes, I would like to do that. Yes. And then that's how I kind of got in that process.
That's interesting. So it was McKinsey's essentially government arm in DC that exposed you to the initial problem set, and you slowly got more embedded in it. Yeah, that's interesting. And then, okay, in the beginning of your journey, you met your co-founder at Stanford Business School. And did you hatch the idea there? Because I want to ask a question, because there's a lot of smart people who push back on the idea of the sort of business school to startup founder track. What'd you learn there? Is that how it happened? Is that not how it happened?
Yeah. So I knew coming out of it was probably a year into In-Q-Tel that I knew I wanted to start a defense company specifically. And the main question I had was like, if I was going to be able to raise money. That was the question I wasn't sure about, because at the time it was 2018 when I was coming out of In-Q-Tel. uh, that was like Project Maven. Like everybody in Silicon Valley hates defense, and like investors were like, "What are you talking about? The sales process for DoD seems insane." So there was a lot of like headwinds, in 2018 at least, on like defense was not a cool thing. And so I honestly used Stanford as a hedge. It's like, all right, I want some unprotected time. So for those of you that don't know, business school is not real school. It's like, it's not like, it's like not, the classes are not real classes. It's like not it's not real. It's not real school. So it's like, I thought about it as like protected time to go try to start this and then see if I could do it. If I couldn't do it, then, at least I had like a fallback in it. But if I could do it, then I just wanted to go do it. And so that's what I came into, Stanford for. And so I knew like day one, I was talking to people, like trying to, I was talking to people about this idea, and that there was only, me was the only other person in my class that had any background that remotely sounded like, defense, intelligence community, whatever. And so we met like pretty, like first week of school, pretty much.
Yeah, because everyone was like, "Have you talked to her?" And everyone was telling her, "Have you talked to Brett?" Yeah, that's funny. One of those situations, and she's a pretty decorated intelligence officer too, if I understand correctly. So pretty deep experiences there.
This episode is brought to you by FlyKit, FLYKITT, the first full solution to jet lag. This might seem hard to believe, but I've flown from Los Angeles to Tokyo and back with virtually no jet lag using FlyKit. Based on research with Navy SEALs and fighter pilots, the FlyKit team discovered that long flights cause inflammation in addition to disrupting your circadian rhythm. And they figured out how to solve both these challenges using a customized program for when to eat, sleep, and use their patented supplements and blue light blocking glasses. It's simple to follow, and you don't have to change anything before your travel day. With FlyKit, more than 90% of people can sleep well in Europe, Asia, or anywhere else in the world on night one. Visit flykit.com and use coupon code FLYWITHEMERGENT to get 15% off FlyKit.
So when you got to that point, like a lot of founders are anxious about founding a company if they are not an engineer themselves or don't have an engineer in the room. How did you guys get over that hump in the earliest days?
So the specific product we were working on was Arabic optical character recognition. Which this was like a terrible product idea, but this was our initial product idea. It came out of like a mission problem that Nini and I both saw in the IC, and for that problem, I knew enough from In-Q-Tel. I was covering computer vision as one of my areas, and I was like extremely confident that by 2019, like Arabic optical character recognition was not like a state of the art problem. You could solve that with, you don't need like the best engineering to solve that problem. I felt fairly sure about that. At the same time, DoD did not have access. The way that they were processing a particular type of data was like completely insane. It made no sense given like where the technology was at. So I felt confident that engineering was not going to be the problem. What I should have done, and I like why I didn't do this is like in retrospect completely insane to me. But like the most useful experience for me that I wish I had before Vannevar was working on a product team that was building something, preferably for defense. Because what I learned on the job by making tons of mistakes was how do you, like, what actually makes a really good 0 to 1 engineer or 0 to 1 product person? How do you do like 0 to 1 sales on a new product? Like all these tasks, I would have much preferred to learn that like in another job as opposed to, like strapped into a rocket of like my own creation. That's like moving around uncontrollably. So I that's the experience that I wish I had. But I felt,
what was like the biggest product learning that you had to have in that first 6 to 12 months?
I think the biggest mistake I made was we were iterating on a problem that nobody cared about at the time. So like in 2017, 2018, the problem that we were working on, this like data processing Arabic problem, like mattered a lot for counterterrorism. By 2019, like nobody cared. And I mistook the non-interest in our demos, because obviously we're doing a lot of demos. Every week we're doing demos. We were getting no interest. Nobody cared. Nobody, we were doing follow-ups. Nobody was responding to our follow-ups. I mistook that as, oh, surely it's just like we don't have the right features on the Arabic OCR
Oh, I
product.
see.
And so we spent an enormous amount of engineering time adding features. So we added like some of these features actually ended up making it into like the Decrypt product, which was the first thing that actually worked from a sales standpoint. But we built features of like, all right, let's not just OCR, but let's translate the text and let's like let you view it in like a way that's true to its original format. And then we spent an enormous amount of time, NER, like, all right, well, hey, we're good at ML. Like, let's like build our own, like train our own named entity recognition model for this really specific dialect of Arabic that nobody cares about. And then we're going to make a really complicated UI for linking all these entities. So we made the mistake of like, thinking we were feature incomplete as opposed to just listening to, oh my God, we actually don't have traction on like a core problem and no amount of features that we build are going to work. That was the biggest lesson that I learned was like, if you're not getting pull, like you're doing something wrong. Like you're working on the wrong problem pretty much.
Yeah. At least for venture backed at a minimum.
Yeah.
So maybe you've already answered some pieces of this, but let me ask anyway. If you could spend a little bit of time on this -1 to 0 idea crystallization, you saw a lot at In-Q-Tel and Nini saw a lot in the IC. But I think one of the hard things for early stage founders is like really crystallizing. How did you build conviction for like the exact thing that you were going to work on? I mean, was it just that the OCR stuff didn't work and then you started trying stuff that was adjacent? Like, how did you build that conviction that you were ultimately going to build an apparatus for collecting open source information that the community needs?
So the initial conviction, which was dated for why Arabic OCR came from being on site and seeing like an actual like intelligence problem and like where it was breaking down and what the consequences of that were. The problem was that was dated information. So knowing that was actually not helpful. In terms of like how I got conviction in terms of where the product went, which was, okay, it's going to be more Mandarin, Russian focused maybe, and has some data collection component to it, was we started getting, I mean, it's going to sound possibly kind of silly, but like this is how it happened. We started getting people started asking us before we would set up these meetings, they would hear, okay, Arabic, like that's cool. And then they would ask like, hey, do you have anything for Mandarin? Sometimes they'd say Russian, sometimes they'd say something else, but like Mandarin and Russian, we started noticing were coming up a lot, and I ignored it. I was like, no, ruthless prioritization. All right, we're going to ruthlessly prioritize Arabic, and so I ignored that for like at least a couple months, and it wasn't until there was one meeting where like clearly Arabic wasn't working anymore. We had nothing to lose. It was like, all right, well, we have this meeting next week. So let's just build like a really hacky, terrible thing for Mandarin and see how it goes. And so we did that. And over the course of doing that, we realized we needed data. So for Arabic, we were working with a lot of Islamic State data. For Mandarin, we didn't know what data was actually mission relevant. And so we started thinking about that a little bit. We pulled in a very manual way, like some stuff, some like military relevant data. And then we started demoing off that. And then we started kind of getting like, I wouldn't say it was pull, but like we would do things and we would get a little bit more interest. And eventually we started to realize that like, okay, maybe this one data set we're looking at has some value. And so then we sort of built something really hacky to programmatically collect that data set. And then, sorry, it's a long story, but eventually we were the first, when I was sure it was going to work, was we had a demo with somebody who was overseas, and they, we were doing the demo, and like he was just talking about like what he cares about like in his day job, and just on a whim, why this didn't occur to me to do this in previous demos, I have no idea. But and on a whim, I just started plugging into our like a basic search thing, and that broke like half the time. But I started plugging in just like some of the topics that he was talking about, and I was getting hits. And so I showed him one of the hits. Of like, hey, you're saying you care about this in your job. I'm seeing this reporting in this location that seems relevant for your job. And he was like, I would like you to send that to me. Because there's like, he was like, he was interrupting us and asking us for stuff in the meeting. And then I was like, all right, I'm pretty sure there's something here. And then we kind of built like with those two kernels of information, like, okay, what languages matter and what types of data matter. We sort of built a a thesis around, like we just started building things
Oh
around
yeah.
those two dimensions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It reminds me, I wasn't in this particular meeting, but there's a folklore story at Palantir where sort of the same thing happens. You show someone a chart of how this bad guy's connected to that bad guy, and someone sort of closes out the meeting very abruptly and says, we're going to go ahead and we're going to need this now, and if you could just stop working on this. And so it's nice because it highlights one of the lessons that I always try to share with product leaders and CEOs, which is you have to actually use your product.
Oh yeah. 100%.
And I don't just mean like test it out for the demo, but in the early phases, you have to actually try to do this job that your customer is doing and see how bad it is, and then find an interesting win. And I love that you guys actually did that. And like, I love the challenge there is, it's funny. I hadn't thought about it until you said it, but you said, hey, we were looking at Islamic State data, and it's sort of obvious at some level, if you're following terrorist organizations, you're going to look for the information the terrorist organization publishes. But when you switch over to nation states, what are you going to look at? Are you going to look at the government website? Are you going to look at every single thing that every single Chinese company has ever done, or every Chinese citizen living abroad? Like, where do you even start to cut that line? And it's like, I don't know, a third of the internet if you choose everything. So you can't choose everything. So that's a problem that you guys kind of took your own stabs on and then got customer feedback on to refine it over time, like which of those sources really mattered. I won't ask you about the specific ones, but is that correct at a high level?
Yeah, and that thesis of like, actually, and it is kind of outside of just the digital domain, like the particular type of data, that we grab for Decrypt, that thesis of, actually, we maybe shouldn't assume that the government has data on everything it needs access to. That is like a core thesis that we've subsequently applied to other mission areas. And that is kind of what has like allowed us to build things that have gotten traction like that. Just that one belief, I think other people literally just that one realization is like a lot, has been a lot of our product strategy.
I used to tell people when I actually worked in the government, I used to tell people who worked outside the government, they were like, well, so what are you guys doing? And I was like, I used to tell people, you will be surprised if you could know the things that we're doing. And you'll also be shockingly surprised at the things that we're not doing. And I used to remember people would always ask me like, or they would say something like, oh, well, our enemies would have thought of that. Like they'll definitely do X, Y, and Z. And I was like, listen, you forget that every single country, every single non-state actor, anybody that we're fighting has the same exact bureaucratic problems that we do, the same limited resources that we do, the same limited access to engineers who can do crazy things that no one else can do that we do. Like everybody else is facing those same constraints. And so these weird little gaps appear, without commenting on specific ones, it's certainly an issue. And so is what you described, was that the MVP? Was this like Chinese language? We can search for a topic within it and then find it, and we've indexed some of these sources. That was the first thing that you guys built?
100%. Yeah. And it like barely worked. And
what was the size of the company? Like how far along were you guys? Did you raise money at that point? Like what was the maturity of the company at that moment?
Yeah, we definitely raised the seed. We were probably, how many months? The first test we did on non-Arabic data was, I think, 7 months in, but we didn't even, despite like clear signals, I didn't actually make the pivot probably until a year, maybe even longer than a year. I kind of wish I could like go back and like check the actual like product timeline here, but yeah, it was like at least 12 months, I think, before we made the pivot. And then our first, I think our first revenue was probably 18 months in, something like that. Yeah.
And how much,
right.
Can I ask you how much it was?
It's like 15,000 or something.
This is great. I really want the other early stage founders to know that you have empathy for them, that like you guys are at this spot now where you can say, okay, we've got like this great business and we're looking back on some of the lessons, and there's still plenty of growth room as well, but you're very established now, right? And so I think it's nice for people to hear, hey, like this took this amount of time. We didn't exchange that much money in exchange for this, but we were able to build on that momentum and then grow from there.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I think our first pilot was like $15K for 3 months and like 3 users. That was like, that was the first
But you knew all three of their names inside and out. You 100%. Had their cell phone numbers. Yeah, I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
So one of
Yeah.
the questions that comes up a lot for national security companies is this classified and unclassified divide. I've been through it myself a couple of times. It's really challenging. And I'd be curious if Vannevar has a playbook or a set of principles that you use in order to validate product ideas where you have to go across that classified, unclassified divide. Like, how do you guys optimize that?
Yeah. You can never build the right product in defense unless you are like in the building with the people doing the job. Like that is like a fundamental requirement. Like I don't think there's any way to build, especially like for software or hardware, but I don't think there's any way to build the right thing unless you are directly sitting with the users. So your goal, if you're like a 0 to 1, like early stage defense company, your goal is to like do that in any way you possibly can. For us before, obviously like we had people that came from the community and that was useful, but we didn't have an FCL, so we couldn't hold clearances. And so we were doing a lot of coffee chats at like, oh, hey, like what we would do is I probably don't know if I should say this on the podcast, but we would basically say, hey, we're going to be in town. We'd like inventor. He's like, hey, we're going to be in town for this other thing. We're going to be at the Starbucks, that just happens to be right outside your base. If you want to come and like chat for 30 minutes. And we're not having classified conversations there, but what we're doing is like we're getting them in person and we're showing them something to react to, and we're using that to get like little tidbits that we can then pull on. But you're basically trying to get clearances in an FCL like as fast as humanly possible. The problem is that you can't do that unless you have a product that people want to buy.
It's very chicken and egg. Yeah, you've got to have the contract before you can get the thing.
Yeah. And so until you do that, but like the most important thing is like you have to be in person with people and you have to like really understand what they're doing in order to have like a shot. And so when we think about like new product development, it's like a requirement for like the product people, and sometimes but not always the engineer, is to like, if we're making a new bet, like whoever is the orchestrator of that bet needs to be spending an enormous amount of time like on customer sites and needs to be a domain expert on that problem. We don't really make bets where that's not the case, because it's like impossible. It's pretty much impossible to do it in defense. And so, yeah, I think like anybody, product and engineer, 0 to 1 engineers especially, but any product person, you need to be spending an enormous amount of time like with the people doing the job.
Yeah, that makes sense. And is that why you guys adopted and then sort of rebranded your own version of forward deployed engineering?
Yeah, that's part of it. Yeah, I think there's actually like 3 good reasons to use FDEs. People probably will have different opinions on this, but like there is immense value in having engineers that are just really good customer facing engineers, even if they're not building anything. Just being able to come into a meeting and be technically credible and compelling is like that's huge value in and of itself. Bonus points if you have an engineer that is like really can do that, but also really likes hacking things together on new mission problems with users. Then you can kind of subtract away the need for like a product manager or a product person, and they can be their own product manager and they can just iterate and build and prototype like cool new things really, really quickly. And then the third good reason for forward deployed engineering in defense is there's like an enormous amount of integration work. And Palantir is like, this is like the whole FDE model at Palantir that is required to like win big programs and be credible with program offices. And so having FDEs that are sitting with folks in the program office who maybe they have some engineers and they're concerned about like how your thing is architected. Is it open architecture? What does like your cybersecurity strategy look like? And being credible on all those things really like has like a big business impact. I think those are like the 3 roles that FDEs can have a big impact on. And yeah, we kind of like, I'd say borrow that idea. We stole the idea. We stole the idea from Palantir.
It's a great look. I love talking about it. Yeah. And I know you guys have Tushar over there who's awesome. Yeah. And so it's an incredibly powerful, like the way I always explain it to people is I want people to know about this, because the more people that know about this, the more amazing products we can build 100%. In the universe. And sure, there's a micro version of it that's like maybe competitive, but if you look at it on the macro scale, more people who know how to build better products, everybody wins. Right. At least everyone on our team, if you will, like in a national security context. Okay. So $15,000 pilot in 2020 to 80 million plus in revenue now. Like, what were some of the inflection points in that growth trajectory, and how has the company needed to adapt its mindset in order to get through those different levels?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. So multiple inflection points that matter a lot. I think the first one we already kind of talked about, which is like you need to have a product that anybody wants to buy. That in and of itself is like actually like really hard to do. It's like hard to make something that somebody wants to buy.
We should just
But
mic drop the whole episode right on this, because like it's so important. Like, anybody wants to buy this. Okay, if you do not have this true, do not continue listening. Start here.
Exactly. Yeah.
ahead,
Like that is like the fun. You absolutely need that to be true. So that first kind of $15,000 pilot, like having the thing that actually people wanted to buy, that was like a huge inflection point. The second inflection point was around how do you sell it? So specifically for us, it's like UFers. So there's like a sales motion, and this is like very DoD jargon heavy, but it's actually pretty key for anybody doing a new defense thing. So unfunded requirements are kind of your main way to sell before you are, before you're like really ingrained with a DoD group and you're in the POM and people plan for you for multiple years and you have program office relationships. You don't have any of that in the beginning. And so if you are trying to demonstrate revenue, and because you need revenue to stay alive, also to demonstrate progress to investors, like the unfunded requirement sales motion is really key. So that just is basically in your sales is how I think about that. That's like $1 to $15 million deals that you can do in sort of the UFOR category. So figuring that out was the second inflection point. I think that took us probably a year. We went from 3 million to 25 million in 1 year just because we figured out the UFOR playbook.
Wow.
That was like the only reason. Yes. And then you have to figure out
by the way, was there someone who, like, did you have a fairy godmother that flew in and said, you guys should consider this? Or was it just you stared at the wall 100 times and threw a bunch of darts and then found the right dart?
I think it was Nini. It was Nini, my co-founder Nini, who figured this out. And then it was her, me, and Scott Phillips, our CTO, going to like a lot of sales meetings together, and then just really just trying to figure out how this works. But I think obviously we've gotten like a lot of help along the way on parts of that problem. Like the early Anduril people have been extremely helpful. John Doyle on your podcast previously, he's been really helpful for us from former Palantir. So we've had people along the way kind of give us tidbits. The problem is that somebody can tell you the answer, and then you can be in the situation and you can totally not understand. Like you have to like mess it up yourself. And then in retrospect, you're like, oh, actually now I understand what that person said to me. I think that is a lot, at least has been my personal experience at Vannevar. People have told me the answer several times on things, but I oftentimes have to try something, mess it up, and then
it's hard to explain this stuff, right? It's like even our joke a few minutes ago about people have to actually want to buy your product. I've had coaching clients ask me very reasonably, what does that feel like? What does that
100%.
actually mean
100%.
that they want to buy it, right? Like, what does that?
Yeah.
And if you haven't gone through that, you don't know what it feels like, and then
100%.
you don't know when it's missing, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, cool. Let's zoom in on the sales process, a topic near and dear to anybody building in the national security space. In 2021, DIU selected you guys from 39 other competing solution briefs to capture data from hostile militaries. And then this later led to a $99 million ceiling contract just in the fall of last year. What are some of the principles you guys have used to win what are almost certainly fierce head-to-head competitions with other highly qualified companies?
Yeah. So the way I think about like DIU, so DIU writes contracts that are called other transaction authority contracts. It's a contract vehicle. That's all it is. It's just a way to put money. It's a way to allow the government to pay you, basically. And there are multiple routes that you can use. There's sort of OTAs are the most common non-FAR based routes, but there's also like phase 3 SBIRs. There's like a set of things that you can sub to a prime. There's like a set of tools that you have from a contracting standpoint. We're very lucky to be we started the company after 2015, and in post 2015 was kind of the world of OTA. OTA started to be a thing. There was actually Chris Brose, who's now at Anduril. He, when he was in the Senate, supporting John McCain, they pushed this incredible modification or clarification to the OTA language that us, when we started in 2019, meant that OTAs were actually a viable vehicle, and DIU is like capable of writing them. So so for us, OTAs are very important in that it's like a contract vehicle. The hard part is still actually getting the funding for that contract vehicle. This is where like all the work, like in like the fighting and like just like the BD time is spent. Okay, great. You have a way for DoD to pay you. They can pay you up to $99 million. Now you have to go find the $99 million.
Right. Yeah. This episode is brought to you by Chaser. Chaser is a task management solution completely embedded in Slack. When teammates have requests for each other, it's no longer necessary to involve a project manager, add the issues to a task tracker, and remember to follow up. Right from within any Slack channel or message, with a few simple keystrokes, you can identify a message as a task for another person or yourself, and Chaser automatically tracks it and reminds the assignee of the work until it's done. We started using Chaser at First Principles to create stronger clarity on those important but less formal tasks that must happen to get from start to finish on a project, but that often don't arise until the middle of a discussion. We now spend less time context switching, and we're not dropping the ball on each other. Plus, there's great transparency into who does what in order to bring the team to success. Get a 14-day free trial at www.trychaser.com and use the code FP50 to get 50% off your first 3 months. Yeah, you got to get, is it task orders on an OTA? I can't remember what the proper term is.
Yeah, I think it's task orders. Okay. Yeah.
So that's for people who are not familiar with this process, the money is allocated, but it hasn't actually been given to a vendor until the government says, here's the thing we'd like you to build. And so you're saying, hey, we've got to go convince them that they still need to use this money to go build something.
So for OTAs, it's actually a step further where the money's not even allocated. It's just a vehicle that has a certain ceiling, can accept a certain amount of money. You actually have to go to each of the individual groups in DoD and convince them to buy your product, and then figure out their own budgeting process. All right, where's the money coming from? Convince them to then use DIU. They're an outside organization. There's like trusts issues sometimes of like, all right, so now you got to sell them on using the OTA and DIU contract vehicle. Then they have to MIPR money. They have to send the money, wire the money to DIU, and then DIU has to execute it. So I think all the BD work comes in. The contract vehicle stuff is hard, but it's hard, but it's easy relative to the other stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so like our sales motion for the other stuff is where like it's not really competition as much. It's just like, how do you get a group excited enough that they're willing to like you have an individual who's like high enough ranking, who cares enough, and they're willing to like spend their own political capital and like beat down like bang your head against the wall for like 12 months to like pop a UFR MIPR out to DIU to get the deal done. And the way that we've approached that in the early days, at least, was we would run like what are called vendor demonstration agreements. This we actually got, I think it was from John Doyle, which is like it's a legal unpaid pilot, basically. It's like a paperwork thing that the government is familiar with. They sign it. You got 90 days to like test your product out. We would deploy the product, generate a bunch of wins, use that time to like figure out what's like the decision approval process for the UFR, tying it back to like the unfunded requirement sales motion. And then we would spend that whole 30 days, like 90 days getting wins with users and then mapping out that chain for the UFR so that at the end of that 90 days, we have a path for that group to then MIPR money to DIU to then get the contract executed. That is where all the BD work happens.
Yeah, goodness gracious. For folks who are following along from home who don't know all these terms, we will put them all in the show notes. But if you are working national security problem sets and you heard a term you don't know, please check our show notes, because these are critical terms about how money moves around, how the contracts are set up, how the laws are set up around the contracts. But hacking this is, I don't know if it's equally important to building a great product, but it's certainly a major pillar of any success. Wow. Okay. So I know your founding premise was defense primes suck and we should kill them. At 80 million in revenue and a couple hundred people, you guys are becoming substantial yourselves. How do you avoid becoming what you set out to replace? And what would winning against defense primes actually look like?
So I think the first thing to think about is like the total I'm going to get these numbers wrong, but the total procurement spend, money that goes to defense primes is on the order of 400 billion. It might be closer to maybe it's 450 billion now. So I think one thing that's like sometimes we get questions about like how often do you run into other defense technology companies? When you add up, okay, you got $450 billion in spend. If you add up all of Palantir's revenue, all of Anduril's revenue, and like all of SpaceX's revenue, you're still at like 1%, maybe 1.5%. I don't know, you round up of like the total procurement spend. And so the defense primes are still extremely dominant, even though you have these companies that are wildly successful, build better products, and like their trajectories are all really great. I'm big fans of all those companies, but the market is so skewed towards incumbents that that's just like, and for us, we're like, good for us. We're 80 million. We're 80 million out of like 450 billion though. You know what I mean? It's like a drop in the bucket. Literally, it's a drop in the bucket. Like we're like a rounding error on the defense budget right now. And so I think it's just I'm not worried about in the short term, at least, kind of becoming, having some of the issues that the primes have. There's a lot of structural issues, and people like talk about this, in like many different forms. But I think the main one, just using software as an example, the main problem for defense primes building good software, I think, actually comes down to cost plus services contracts. So this is like those of you that aren't defense familiar, basically it's the government paying for engineering hours. They'll pay, I'm going to pick on Lockheed, but like Lockheed will win a contract. They probably usually aren't going to do the work. They're actually going to subcontract out the work. Maybe take like a 7% fee just to do the paperwork on the deal. To like, I don't know, like Booz is not the right example. Well, I use like Booz as an example. And then Booz says this piece of software is going to take me 200 engineers over a 5-year time period to deliver it. And they're billing the government for engineering hours, and they're taking a cut of margin on top of that engineering hour work. That is terrible for like many reasons. One of which is it incentivizes, like, you make your profit on your cost basis. And so like that just incentivizes people to like delay delivery and like have
make it
a lot
as
of engineers
complicated as possible. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what
that.
we're seeing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's what happens on these software programs that maybe are like literally like a normal software program might be $200 million for DoD. And it'll be a 3 to 5 year delivery timeline. And like the thing won't get delivered, or if it delivers it, it's not going to be very good. And the reasons are structural. Like they're incentivized to not deliver it, and they're incentivized to make it like, whatever, bad. Also, there's like engineering talent issues. But I think for us, like the big difference between us and Palantir and Anduril and SpaceX is the common factor between all those companies is we self-fund product development. Like we have our own cash. We use our cash to decide where we want to invest. And that means that we own the IP for those products. And that means that we don't have to use like a cost plus structure where the government owns all the IP and is like dictating requirements. We are taking the risk. Like we are raising money, selling chunks of the company. All 4 companies do the same thing. We sell a chunk of the company, and then we bet that we're going to be right and build a good product that people want to buy. And if we're correct, then like good for us. We get to sell it. If we're wrong, then like, well, that sucks. I guess we're not going to be around as a company anymore. But that incentivizes like, okay, got to build a product that actually works. You have to deliver it really quickly. And, like you got to be smart about like what investments you're making. So sorry, it's like a long-winded answer.
No, but that's part of how you're staying competitive is you're going to continue to self-fund the R&D. You're going to continue to control your own roadmap. And also, ... we're not that big yet.
We're rounding it.
Yeah, that's funny. I have to ask, your talking points are so similar to the philosophies that we cared about at Palantir. Did you consider in 2019 joining Palantir and just like joining onto that mission, or did it feel like it was already too late at that point for you in terms of the maturity of the company?
I considered it in 2016. So before I jumped to In-Q-Tel, when I was still at McKinsey. And at the time, I would have loved to work at Palantir. At the time, Palantir was de-emphasizing the government business and emphasizing the commercial business. And so I got routed to like the RTD2 team, which I'm sure you're familiar with, because I'm a consultant. I'm like, whatever.
Yeah, super smart people, but a very different focus. Yeah.
And the interview was like, how do you scale people operations and recruiting? And I was just like, I want to work on intelligence stuff. And they're like, no.
You know what the irony is? The irony of this is, without getting too deep into inside baseball, that team was a very high-powered team that did really awesome stuff. But right around that moment in time, the team had to have sort of like a rebirth where everybody on that team had to first go spend time forward deployed. And then that became a theme for virtually any team, was like, you can't work on a team unless you forward deployed first. And it was a super successful thing that we did, but it it started with a pinch of like letting people get a little bit too far from the mission sometimes. So that's really fascinating that's, I'm actually kind of bummed. Like we could have collaborated on something fun together.
That would have been awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Although I'm happy that you did this because like clearly this was an underserved need that Palantir is not currently solving to my knowledge and is super important for what's going on out there. You guys have more than one product. I know we've mostly talked about Decrypt, but you have multiple products in your product line, which is a pretty common thing to see at this size national security-based venture-backed company. But how do you decide when you're willing to add a new one? What bar do you hold for adding a new one?
So I think the most important thing, if you're shooting for a defense prime like outcome, like you're trying to really build a multi-billion dollar defense company, is you need to be thinking about, because the sales cycles are so long, you need to be thinking about product pipeline while you're thinking about like revenue targets, and you need to be doing it like 3+ years in advance. I know that sounds insane for like an enterprise SaaS company, but that is what you have to do for defense. And so Anaril, I know, thinks about it the same way. Like when we think about 2030, for example, we're targeting $1 billion in revenue by 2030. That's really hard. That's like nearly impossible. It's like a very hard thing to do, but we can map, okay, given the current products that we have, if we crush all those products and like kind of capture the markets around those products, what do we think we're going to be at revenue wise, and then what's the gap, like how much incremental revenue do we need by 2030 in order to hit that revenue target? And then you can kind of start to work backwards of, okay, well, if I know I need, I'm just making a number up, like 200 million or 300 million in revenue, extra revenue, that means I need to be building new products like in 2026 and 2027. And I know that I'm not going to have 100% hit rate on those products. I know that maybe half of them are going to go to zero. And I know that the ones that aren't going to go to zero, I know they're going to have like, there's some characteristics about that revenue ramp that you sort of know because of how the sales process works and like how you start to build relationships with program offices and all that stuff. So one of the dimensions of product strategy, if you're trying to shoot big for defense, is like you have to be, and I'm not saying we're like very good at this. I think Anaril is very good at this. Like you need to be kind of thinking like 3 to 5 years in advance on like what products are you building now that's going to unlock you to hit certain certain targets down the line. So that's like the necessity of it, I guess, and it's urgent. Like you need to be thinking about like I'm constantly worried about our product roadmap. Like, are we making enough new bets? Like just that's like a constant thing that I think about. In terms of conviction, it goes back to any time that we've ever tried to build a product just from like our feelings. We feel like, this technology is cool and this mission is important and they should work together in some way. That's never worked. It's always been us going to customer sites, usually like kind of existing deployments that we have, having domain expertise and seeing a new problem and then starting with the problem and then working backward to like, how would we solve it? It's always been like contact with the mission and the customer that's yielded product results. Every time we've tried to like Imagineer or like whiteboard, whatever, it's never worked for us. And so I think, once you are picking on a problem and you kind of like build an initial prototype, then you can start using that to go have more touch points with customers and kind of get more feedback on like, are you getting pull or not? And you sort of build conviction that way. So I think, I know this is like not a novel answer, but it's just like, you build conviction by having as much domain expertise and as much contact with that user group and that mission problem as possible.
If I can parse it and see how you react to it, I will sometimes advise people to use those customer interactions to drive their understanding of what the problem is, but maybe bring some of that, to borrow your term, Imagineering, into the dialogue for coming up with the correct solution. Like, what is the product going to be to solve this problem? Yeah. Do you agree with that sort of breakdown, or do you guys view it differently?
Yes, using touch points with the customer to figure out what the problem is. And then I think this is probably still what you're saying, is just like when you have those touch points, using those to test ideas too. It's just bring something for people to react to versus, kind of.
Well, like the creativity part, of like, what should we build has more, like it's never perfectly suited, but it has more of a place in the, how do we craft the solution than it has in the, like, if you imagine you're the problem, you're screwed, right? Like, but if you imagine you're the solution, and show it to people very rapidly, you will eventually evolve to something more and more powerful.
Yep, I think that's right.
You agree with that?
I think that's right. Yeah.
You have an interesting philosophy that you shared with me, which is DoD doesn't buy features, they buy complete things that solve mission problems. Can you give us a specific example of how that changes your product planning?
Yeah. I'll use like the OCR example. So I mentioned we built this OCR product, and then we added a bunch of features. We built named identity recognition. We built like a bunch of features on top of that product. The way that we envisioned Arabic OCR, just OCR in general, is we'll sell it as like an API or whatever. Like people will send us data, images, and we'll like OCR them, and we'll return the text back, and like that's how DoD is going to use this. Like that is never going to work. That's never going to work. Like for a lot of reasons. One is like DoD doesn't have the engineers to integrate the thing. So like I think the more so what I kind of mean by that feature versus complete system concept is like if there's any integration work that DoD needs to do that involves to get to a mission outcome, your odds of selling that thing and generating outcomes on pilots are like an order of magnitude lower. It's not impossible, but like it's like an order of magnitude more difficult to like get a sale or get something done if there's like DoD involved integration that like.
By the way, this is not just DoD. In my new venture-backed company where we're focusing on local government, I'm already hearing early in the sales cycles things like, well, how are we going to migrate off the old system? And if you don't have an answer to that problem, there is no sale, right? Because like they have to get off the old systems. It's like government wide. And I think it's helpful for listeners to have some empathy for why that is. Part of that is because the whole contracting process that you just described is required for any change order, any modification, anything that's going to happen to any of those other systems that are in the cycle.
Yeah, no, yeah, for sure. And I think the other thing, and I'm curious if this is true for local government too, but for defense, the dynamics are the prime on the program captures almost all the economic value, like 90% of the economic value. And so if you are building a feature or a subsystem that has to fit with a prime, now you have to like integrate. There's like integration work that needs to happen that automatically makes it more difficult, but also you are signing up for something that reduces your ability to capture the program by 10x ish. And so it's like there are ways to do it, but if you're trying to really have an impact on the defense space, I think you kind of have to like build. I think you have to kind of build complete systems. Yeah.
Let's talk generative AI and search for a minute. So obviously a huge feature, well, maybe not obviously to folks, but one of the key features that you guys have is once you collect all this data, you make it very easy for people to find what they're specifically looking at so they can find their targets, they can find the things that they're paying attention to, the trends. And you mentioned to me privately that 70% of your search functionality is creatively using LLM summarization. What are some of the lessons that you guys have had there? What does that mean?
Yeah, so I think agents are really useful. I don't know how some of your listeners may be more deeper on this than I am, but agents for search are really useful in that if you have like a really unique data set, I think the interesting part for LLMs is not necessarily generating the responses, although like generating like nice structured responses where you can like have citations and things like that is really important, and like you have to do that. But I think it's more around using agents to iteratively and creatively call your own data. Like I'm trying to think of like a basic example. Let's say I'm searching for cup. I don't know. This is a terrible idea. That's I'm searching for results. Like, give me cup results. It might. It's going to try a bunch of different variations of cup. Let's say it's looking at like. All right. Usually, you're going to give it more context. I'm looking for a cup in like a WeWork on like a table on a specific day. It's going to recursively try all these different tools that you have set up. One tool might be search this one internal data set. And also it's going to try different variations of like query fields that you have. So like dates, different ways to describe the cup, like different context around the cup. And it's doing, what might a year ago may have been one Boolean search query that you put into a search bar. You're now able to generate like 100 queries. And then you have some logic in terms of like how you rank, like rack and stack them. And you have some logic in terms of how you parse the results back. And it's like an order of magnitude difference in terms of quality of results if you set up the system in the right way. There are challenges with it. Like one of the key challenges is around sourcing. Like you have to force or bully, if you're using LLMs, you have to kind of bully the model to give you sources. Which if you own the data, it's easier to do versus if you're not feeding an LLM like data that you own, this is like maybe more complicated to do, but forcing it to give you sources for why it is making certain steps or or enforcing structured output. These are all things that have been helpful to us, but I think agents are like kind of a pretty big deal for search specifically. It's cool. It's exciting. Things are different now, even than like today versus like 3 months ago, specifically for like agent-based stuff.
Yeah. What do you find you have to remind people about to get them to lean into generative AI technologies inside your company, whereas what stuff kind of comes for free just because of the excitement and the hype?
So I think this is maybe applies to like product folks. Like, and I spend a lot of time still on the product side. It kind of goes back to what you were saying in the beginning, which is you have to use your own products. Even like at our scale, like I still use the products to do mission tasks, and you need to do that because that's what gives. If you're a product person, you need to have intuition on like what actually are your products doing, and what sounds like really basic, but like what are your products doing? Like what are they good at? What are they bad at? And I think the same applies for like this. Again, this is like I feel like I'm saying this as if I'm some expert, but I'm not. I'm just like a dude that's been grinding away for like 6 years on this. Like I think the same is true for new technology. So for LLMs, for example, for agents, it's like you need to test. If you're trying to convince people to like use agents, you yourself need to like actually test that technology out, preferably like on the actual mission problem with like as real data as possible to prove out if that's a good idea or not. Prove to yourself. And then I think it's about like, you have different problems when you're a very small company. When you're a big company and you have products that work, you have this challenge of like people want to protect the products that they're assigned to, or like kind of the legacy products and what's worked before. And you have to kind of create an environment where it's okay to like you are encouraging people to kill those products. I think I'm still kind of struggling and figuring out how to do that at our scale. But I think when you have products that have been successful, you actually can become a victim of your own success in that like people are slower to change and adopt like the things that actually are going to make that product 10x better. And so you just, again, I haven't figured this out yet, but
I think what you're describing is that you go into founder mode periodically, but even as a founder, you have to learn how to go into founder mode in a way that's additive and not destructive, right? Or intentionally destructive where it should be destructive, but net additive to the enterprise, right? So yeah, no small feat. Well, this is awesome, man. Any new big things coming down the pike that we should be watching out for that would be exciting for people to watch?
No, I think for us, like the main things we're working on is just continuing to try to bet in new mission areas and build new products in those mission areas. And so things like cyber are and like sensing hardware, these are all things that are relatively new for us. And we're actively like building 0 to 1 stuff and looking for 0 to 1 people that want to, do the thing with us. But other than that, now just kind of continuing to do the thing. It's a long journey.
Yeah, awesome. Where can potential recruits, clients, investors, et cetera, get in touch with you guys?
If you just, for recruits, just apply online, Vannevar Labs, or, shoot me a LinkedIn, or, LinkedIn note or anything like that. But yeah, we're always down to chat.
Awesome. Super fun to have you on today. I really appreciate it, Brett. Thanks for taking the time.
All right. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you so much for listening. Emergent is brought to you by First Principles, where we provide emerging technology product coaching and fractional product leadership to founders with bold visions. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please consider leaving a review or sharing feedback directly with us. You can always find previous episodes, show notes, and more content on www.emergentproduct.com.